All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with another episode today. We've got somebody who's really cool, working as a cinematographer and a filmmaker for years, but now you've also gotten into beekeeping as of recently, or you've been a beekeeper for a long time and decided to make a movie about it, which is awesome, called The Pollinators. We got Mr. Peter Nelson today.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. He agreed to come on and tell us a little bit about his movies and his projects, and also about bees, because we love bees. And we're always about talking about nature and life cycles and the building blocks of life. So we're glad to have him. So I guess you've been working as a filmmaker, and you've got a big body of work. You've been working for other people, working for yourself, doing all kinds of projects. How did you get started in nature and filmmaking? Can you tell us a little story?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up as what I refer to as sort of a free range kid. I went outside. I had pretty much most of my childhood was spent outside in nature, and I just developed that keen curiosity about nature and how things connected. What lives under that rock. What kind of bird lives in that tree? What kind of fish is that? And I just fell in love with it. I've always luckily had a couple of great teachers early in my life who kind of pushed that and fostered it in me, and lived in a rural area, so I had access to it. And so I just have always had a interest in nature and gardening. We always had a garden when I was growing up, and so that's pretty much the background. How I became a cinematographer was oddly enough, didn't watch a lot of TV when I was growing up. But when I was growing up, I was watching things like Jacques Cousteau and National Geographic and Wild Kingdom and things like that. And I thought that'd be kind of a cool thing to do. And I found my way there. And so those worlds have collided to some extent. I don't exclusively do nature documentaries. I do all different types of documentaries and commercial projects and feature films occasionally. But my heart really goes to documentary, and it also as often as I can get out in nature, I do. And so combining those two things is really sort of the sweet spot for me. And I've been a beekeeper for 32 years now.
Wow.
32, 33 years now, which is a good start in beekeeping. Some days I feel like I know a little bit less than when I started. Half joking, but there are days that the great thing about keeping honeybees is they are very humbling. If you ever think that you maybe know what's going on, they will set you straight and do something different and surprise you. And I love that. That makes it endlessly fascinating for me. And so the combination of those two things was really where the Pollinators came from. I did another short film using high-speed photography about bees, a 5-minute film called Dance of the Honeybee. And that's out on Vimeo and YouTube, and it's just out there for anybody to see if they want. And that really inspired me to try and take on something bigger. And so this literally started as a backyard project because I do have bees in my backyard. And I there's some great films about bees out there, but I really wanted to try and as a beekeeper and a cinematographer, I wanted to take a stab at telling the story of bees and agriculture and our food. And I thought maybe I would have a perspective on that might be a little bit different. That's basically the evolution of where the Pollinators came from.
And this is a great documentary. Everybody should check out this documentary. It's fascinating and amazing. But you found out a lot of things along the way, like how we do it on an industrial scale. And you also discovered and kind of started appreciating other kinds of pollinators.
Yeah, totally. The approach that we took for the film was we sort of used here in America, and it also happens in Canada and it happens on a smaller scale in Europe. But it's a massive scale here. There are a relatively small number of commercial beekeepers that move managed honeybees around in the United States to agriculture. And I realized that most people don't know that happens. Even many beekeepers didn't know that happens. And I thought that'd be kind of an interesting way to get into this story because our food system here in the U.S. is dependent upon bees and pollination, and specifically managed honeybees for many things. Many of the things that we eat, almonds, are a great example. Apples, blueberries, all pollinated by bees, and places where they bring managed honeybees in tractor trailer loads or semi-truck loads of beehives, and they put them out in the orchards or fields at night, very much in remote places. So most people don't know what happened. Somebody will come in the middle of the night and drop off, 1,200 beehives and, in the middle of the night, and then they're gone by the next morning. The bees are there, but people don't notice that.
Yeah.
And yet our food system is dependent upon it. And so I thought that was a great way to kind of enter into the story of where our food comes from and tell the story of the problems with bees and other pollinators, and also this interesting subculture of agriculture. These commercial honey beekeepers that are moving these honeybees around. And they're a fascinating group of people. And they're doing an incredibly important job that is sort of propping up our food system. Much of our agriculture here is the farmers use these managed honeybees as almost like an insurance policy, where they will, because when an apple tree, for example, goes into blossom, it might bloom for 10 days or so, where it's viable for pollination. And of course, you need to have pollination in order to have fruit. And if the weather's not good, you could end up with 2 or 3 days of pollination, because if it's raining or whatever. And if there are no native bees around to pollinate those trees, then you may not have pollination. And if you don't have pollination, you don't have a crop. And so a lot of farmers use these managed honeybees as an insurance policy to saturate, if you will, the fields or the orchards with bees so they can ensure the pollination happens.
So were you shocked when you were doing it in the backyard and stuff? When you saw it on an industrial scale, were you shocked, or what was your response to that?
I wasn't really shocked per se, because I had read about it over the years, but I knew it happened, but I had never seen it up close. And that was amazing. The scale of it was amazing. When you have a truck full of bees, 400 hives. Just going to do the math here real quick. The truck full of bees of 400 hives of maybe 50,000 bees in it could be. Could be 10 million bees, right? On a single truck. And so that's let me do the math right there.
Get out the calculator.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to misstate that, but it's millions and millions of bees on each truck. So 10 million bees on a truckload is a fairly safe estimate.
Wow.
For a semi truck.
That's crazy.
So it was really fascinating, because these are great characters, hard work, some of the hardest working people I've ever seen in my life. They tend to be often from family businesses, father son, father daughter, those types of legacies of commercial migratory beekeepers. And interestingly enough, they're not doing it as a hobby, like I am, but it's a business for them. It's a big business. But why they're doing it, I think sometimes isn't depicted accurately, in the sense that they, as beekeepers, are responding to the changes in agriculture rather than driving the change of agriculture. So as agriculture has changed here in the U.S. and we've gone to more monocultures of single crops of something growing in an orchard or a field, where no other crop is grown, you have a very limited opportunity for other pollinators to be in there to live, right? Because if there's, an almonds, I'll use it as a great example. The almond pollination starts here in California. I'm in New York, but it starts in California in late February, March, and it'll go for about 6 weeks or so, sometimes 8 weeks. During that time, it's a feast for bees, and they're almost exclusively pollinated by honeybees. But for the rest of the year, there's nothing there for any other bees to eat. And so they have to have, not only the habitat, but they have to have the nutrition. They have to have the diet. And so as the monocultures, have a single bloom in a single season, it's like a desert for the bees the other time of the year.
That's a really important word that you use, because I've heard other people that study bees use it as these are food deserts when you start monocropping large fields of one thing. And that means that you absolutely have to get bees shipped in constantly, because they don't live there naturally. And this is one way that we have shot ourselves in the foot. But you made a good point, because you said honeybees up until this point. Now, there are other pollinators, and flying insects and stuff. Who's most efficient for what job? Are honeybees better? Why are the honeybees so commonly used?
Yeah, so honeybees are kind of generalists. They pollinate a lot of different things. But, some things that happen with pollination are sheerly mechanical, right? How long is a proboscis of a bee or a moth or whatever? Can it get into the nectary of the flower? Can it grab the pollen? Can it move the pollen? Does it brush up against the pollen? And bees are really good. Honeybees are really good for that, because they're sort of generalists, and there are a lot of different crops that they are able to pollinate. There are other bees that are more efficient on certain crops, like blue orchard bees are very, very, very efficient, but they're small populations relatively, and they don't expand as a population in the ways that honeybees can. Honeybees have this unique combination of things that they can scale up their population from. Like, as a backyard beekeeper, my population coming out of the winter is probably somewhere around 20,000 each hive. That'll swell up to as much as 60,000 in July. So wow. It's a massive increase because a queen bee can lay 1,500 or 2,000 eggs a day. They're also movable, right? So that makes them somewhat unique, is that they can, when they come out of the hive in the morning, they orient themselves to the sun and they fly out and they look for a place to feed, right? So they send scout bees out and they find nectar and they find pollen, and then they'll come back and they'll communicate that to the other bees, the field bees in the hive, and then they'll go out and they'll get it. And so if you move them at night, when all the bees go back into the hive, you close up the hive and pack it up and move it. The next morning, if you move it 100 miles away, they're going to come out in the morning and say, okay, this is a little different. Here I am. And they'll go about and do their business. So those two things, the fact that their population can be managed, split, and grows so quickly, plus the fact that they are movable, makes them kind of ideal for the managed beekeepers. But there are other bees that are equally important to agriculture here, like bumblebees are used in tomatoes. Honeybees don't pollinate tomatoes, but bumblebees do.
Wow!
And so people put bumblebees inside greenhouses, like in Florida and other places where they grow in the off season, so they'll do that. But again, bumblebees, they're sort of semi-social in the way that they have very small hives or clusters where there'll be sometimes 50, sometimes a couple hundred, whereas the scale of a honeybee hive can go up to 60,000 or more sometimes.
That's incredible.
But the other thing is that, there's so many different types of bees, right? And that's one of the things that I'm sort of almost endlessly fascinated with, is that worldwide there are 20,000 different species of bees. They all have a place in nature. They all have a place in the ecosystem. And honeybees get a lot of the press and they get a lot of the publicity, but they're in a way, they're sort of like chickens. I'm not really worried about honeybees going extinct. I'm more worried about those rare bumblebees or those rare, semi-social solitary bees that are out there that are losing habitat, struggling with nutrition, struggling against pesticides and all the other challenges, and climate change that are affecting all bees. And so there are many, many, many different types of bees. They're all equally, if not more beautiful than honeybees. And that's one of the things that I love doing. as a beekeeper is just in my garden outside. I'm always looking at different bees. Wow, what kind of bee is that? A little metallic sweat bee that's just a quarter of an inch long or whatever. I'm fascinated by where those insects live, what they do, what their range is, and how they get by, what their life cycle is. It's just it's amazing, sort of a bottomless well of knowledge of insects and particularly bees.
Yeah. And then you touched on something pretty important there, which is we're losing a lot of biodiversity in everything, where we use one type of eggplant, one type of this, one type of that, and we end up getting rid of all the very rare, exotic, more interesting types. We've done that with people throughout the years, colonialism and whatnot, and imperialism. But it's really important to save those heirloom tomatoes and those, exotic bees that it's going to get harder for wildlife in general here in the future.
Oh, totally. It's one of the things that, we always talked about. My wife, Sally Roy, who's the executive producer of the Pollinators. And she and I, when we would go out with the film and talk to people about it at screenings and festivals and things like that, is one of the things that I always try to impart to people is the idea of diversity, right? We need diversity. We need diversity as human beings. It makes life so much more interesting if we live in a diverse society. And that is even more true in nature, right? There's an interesting parallel, I think, so often between our lives as humans. We are part of nature, but we sometimes think that we're a part of nature, a part of nature, not a part of nature. Yeah. And so I think that diversity in the natural world is essential, right? Because everything is out there. The most annoying little mosquito or fly, or slug has a role of something that it does that is all part of this almost inconceivable fabric of our ecosystems and our agricultural systems. And you're totally right about the diversity of plants. And one of the other things that we've been very much interested in over the years is slow food and protecting these food cultures and food traditions and seeds and saving seeds and trying to plant different things, heirloom plants, heirloom vegetables, heirloom apples. We were just at an apple place here in New York where it's apple season, and they had it's a relatively small orchard, but they had dozens of different types of apples, some of which I've never heard of before. Things that fruit for a week every year or every 2 years, some of them. And they're delicious. And there's this incredible complex taste of things that we can take advantage of if we look and stop just trying to buy the same old, square, tasteless tomato or the red delicious apple, which is not really delicious most of the time.
No. It's actually quite watery and not too flavorful.
Yeah.
But this is something that we're going to have to face. And the consumer or whatever has to step up and say, no, we want this diversity. It can't just be a select group of us weirdo hippies who want it.
You're absolutely right. And that's another thing that we always try to tell people when we're talking to them is that we as consumers have so much power, right? There's stuff on the shelf, whether it's honey or whether it's vegetables or fruit or any other product in the store. Every time we go into a store, every time we go to a market, we're voting with our dollars, right? And so what you buy, what you don't buy, what you ask for is super important. And so I try to always make the connection when I go to a store or a farm market or whatever with the farmer or the people and ask them, where did this come from? Where did that, where did this, and a good store will tell you and they'll know, where did these blueberries come from? I'm sorry, but I don't want to eat blueberries in New York in January because they are coming from South America. So what's the carbon footprint of that? We pick and freeze our own blueberries. So that's what we eat in January. But it's like, making those sort of connections to, where your food is coming from, what it is, who grew it, and trying different things is such a rich experience. You're not going to like every type of eggplant. You're not going to like every apple, but it's that diversity that is really going to help both those small farmers and the markets, and also lead to a much more interesting, diverse diet for us.
See, you have multiple reasons there why you would want a diversity in the type of products that you're consuming. And first of all, you know where it's coming from. We have a history of corporate malfeasance. We went through the days of the jungle in Upton Sinclair when we learned that there was sawdust in the meat packing, and then there was, plastic in the rice, things like this, where quality does matter, and that you have to know that these corporations will cut corners at every cost, and we've paid the cost throughout the years, and now we have food that's unpalatable, not diverse. And that's that. But on the other side, it's delicious. It's delicious. So it's win-win.
Our first, just a little aside, our first stop when we go to our local market here, supermarket, which is still run by the same family, but they have like 4 branches. And our first stop is the ugly fruit bin, right? Because they have this fruit and fruit and vegetables that, are on sale because they don't look perfect.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just that touches all kinds of buttons of being a, thrifty New Englander, but also, avoiding food waste. And then you never know what you're going to have. You never know what you're going to find. So that's interesting. Let's try that. And so that's what we might have for dinner that night, and it's not bad. It's just maybe it's got a little bruise in it, or it's, whatever. But
so I'm extremely lucky because I live in Germany, and Germans have no idea what a peach should be like when it's ripe. They have no idea what a pear should be like when it's ripe, and they don't understand avocados. So when I go to the store and they're nice and soft and they're perfect, just perfect, they are on sale.
Yeah, exactly.
So I got them. So
your opportunity.
Yeah. But everybody think more locally. Try to do your own stuff. I also got a little oyster mushrooms growing in my back room. And so far, it's been an experiment, but it's been delicious. Yeah. And I'm a total mushroom fan now.
Yeah, I grow shiitakes as well as oysters.
Oh, you do?
On logs here, yeah.
So do you worry about the spore when the spores kind of sporulate? And do they create a dust? And how do you handle that?
Oh, they're outside. They're out on, have them out in the woods. They're on inoculated logs. And so I've grown shiitakes for years. And then I just inoculated a whole bunch of logs with different oysters, different types of oysters this year. So I haven't gotten any yield yet on that. But.
So how do you keep your spores, or like you want to keep some medium has the stuff growing on it? Was mycelium, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So how do you keep the whole process going? It's basically free, right? You just cut off a chunk and put it in some more. And how does that work?
Yeah. So with shiitakes and also with oysters, my technique is I follow what other people and organizations say to do, but I'm lucky enough to have some woods where I can cut down trees. And so they're not stuff that's already on the ground, which will already be populated by different myceliums. But if you cut down a live tree, let it sit for a week or two, let the defense mechanisms die back a little bit, keep them off the ground, and then you drill holes, and I put plugs, little dowels that are inoculated with spawn on it, and then cover it with wax, and then they're raised up and then they're outside, and then it's just a matter of keeping them semi-moist. And then I can also, with the shiitakes, I've learned how to create a flush with them by soaking them put them in a trough, like a horse trough or something, for 12 hours or 24 hours, and then take it out. And then about 10 days later, the entire log will fruit. And so you can't do that repeatedly because it has to have a chance to rest and reset. But it's kind of interesting. I'm totally fascinated by mushrooms.
Have you ever got any cross-contamination, and how can you tell?
No, I haven't. These logs, they're raised up on, I have them on pallets off the ground, so they're not in the dirt or whatever. They're raised up, and then I have them on other cedar logs, which don't, and so they're sort of isolated, if you will. And by letting the defense mechanism down and then inoculating with the spawn, that will become the dominant mycelium network that grows underneath the bark. So I haven't had a problem with it getting inoculated with something else.
That feels counterintuitive, just because you're leaving something outside and the nature on it by its own. But these things are apparently very strong.
Yeah, they become, you're putting, a couple of dozen inoculated plugs, every 6 inches or so on the log. So I think it very quickly becomes the dominant network and forces anything else out.
So what's the material that you say these plugs? Is it you're not talking about like a spore syringe, or how do you what is it?
Yeah. So what I personally do, because I don't do a large scale, is I just have they're tiny little dowels. They're about that big, and they are inoculated with spores from different strains of shiitakes or oysters in my case. So there's just a little dowel. You drill a hole, put it in, cover it with wax, and then let them do their thing. That's
amazing. And the wax helps it be in its beginning stages to stay sealed and uncontaminated.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well, good to know. That was not on the question list, but that was quite useful for me.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you about something that's really important to me too, which is stuff like pesticides and herbicides. What is that doing to the bees? Can we tell the people real quick just what's going on?
Yeah, there's the big problem with pesticides, and pesticides as a term covers all the sides, right? So just to be clear, pesticides also covers insecticides, fungicides, and other types of killing things. Typically, when people are talking about pesticides, they're talking about insecticides. The big problem. One of the big problems here are these systemic pesticides that they've been using in agriculture here, which they're much safer for humans to handle, which is not a small thing, but they're systemic in the plant. So if you have a corn plant, for example, that is coated with a insecticide, a pesticide, and I'm trying to think of the name of the one that we encountered, but it's becomes systemic within the plant. So it goes up through the vascular system of the plant as it grows, and it's in the plant, right? And so by design, so if a pest comes along and bites into it, they get that dose of pesticide, and then they die. The problem is that it's in the plant, right? And so they're water soluble. So some of it runs off and gets into the ground and gets into water systems, but it also goes up into the pollen and the nectar, right? And so that can be carried back either intentionally or unintentionally to a beehive or to other insect nests. So like corn is not something that's pollinated by bees. It's wind pollinated. So, but that pollen blows on top of other things. And so it might end up on the squash plant next to it, or in a neighbor's yard, or end up on a bee, or a bee could pick it up and bring it back. And then, even in small doses, these neonicotinoid pesticides can cause a lot of damage to bees. And it's not just honeybees, it's a lot of other insects. Bumblebees in particular are also big pollinators, and they're affected by this a lot. And so it's almost like, it's a funny thing, because I'm not against the use of pesticides altogether, because I do think that it is a necessary thing to have pesticides for certain things. But using these systemic pesticides in this way is, as somebody said, it's almost like taking an aspirin in the morning because you think you might have a headache in the afternoon. You're treating something that you don't know is a problem yet. Yeah. So I think the way people are doing it successfully and responsibly is using an integrated pest management system, right? Where they're looking at the pest on the particular plant in a particular field, a particular orchard, and the effect that it's having on that particular organism at that particular time, and then treating it, rather than treating it because something might be a pest down the road. And so I think that it's more labor involved in that. There's no question about that. but you're using less pesticides, using, and that's true with fungicides as well. You're using this in a more cautionary way, and not less discriminately than you would be if you're just coating a seed with it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're letting the market dictate what it thinks is the right thing to do. And in this case, it happens to be the most inefficient thing because they just want essentially a cost-effective way to do things. And their solution is dump poison on it. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Elaine was just on the show and she was talking about soil health. And she says, it's a sterilant. You put glyphosate on a plant. It's a sterilant. It's going to kill everything. Everything that you don't want and everything that you do want. Right.
Yeah, it's true. And I have to wonder, I mean, there's a lot of study being done on these different things, whether it's a fungicide or whether it's an herbicide or insecticide. But as like a fisherman, I worry about fields that are next to streams because, trout, bass here feed on aquatic insects. And if those insecticides are leaching into the water tables, which they do, and they are water soluble, which they are, I have to wonder, what is the effect of that? When you have an herbicide like the glyphosate that's being sprayed, oversprayed on different things to kill off something that might grow there. And I'm not a farmer, so I have I'm an outsider's look on this. Is it practical? I don't know. But when I ride around here and I look out into the middle of a cornfield or a soybean field that I know has been sprayed by glyphosate, and I see that one weed out there that's standing as a sentinel, a totem out in the middle of that field, and say, that's the one you got to watch out for because that's the one that's resistant, right? And that is going to be the problem because just like antibiotics, things, the more you take them, the more resistance and the viruses and pests and weeds are finding a way around this pesticide. So it's kind of on this endless cycle of creating these stronger and stronger, herbicides and pesticides.
Yeah. So, and I got to be honest, I see that in technology in general is us constantly trying to catch up and try to fence our nature out of our world, but at the same time, nature is going to come creeping in every time. And especially with climate change, now we tried to fence it out with office buildings and cubicles and burn up all this fossil fuel, and it's going to come back in the form of hurricanes and tornadoes and floods.
But another important thing about the pesticide thing is that it's not just the farmers, right? It's people too, right? People here in the U.S. Put stuff on their lawn. Because they want to kill the dandelions or whatever else they see an insect and they want to kill it. And so, consumers are big purchasers of, all types of pesticides, and you don't have to have any training to do it. You can go to any store, any hardware store, any big box store and buy, this stuff and spray it without really knowing what you're doing. There's no requirement to really do that. So I think that, when people, look out, and if, we're fortunate enough where we live to have a lawn. And so I think one of the things I try and get across to people is let's reframe the idea of a lawn. What is beauty? Do we need to have a lawn that is just an acre of perfectly, manicured green monoculture grass? That is cut into, patterns that looks like the, outfield of Yankee Stadium? Or do we want to look out on a yard that has a diversity of grasses and flowering plants like dandelions and clovers and things like that? And to appreciate how beautiful those things are. And they're also creating habitat and food for many, many, many different types of insects. And so I think that we can, one of the things as filmmakers that I think we try to do is we try to reframe the discussion a little bit and sort of give people a lens to look at the world in a slightly different way that they may not have seen before. And that's something that I think about is like, well, why is that beautiful? Why is this nice? Why can't we call this beautiful if it's a little bit more wild and feral and overgrown? That's equally beautiful to me.
Yeah.
So
I think to some degree, people, they take comfort in knowing, because I think we all instinctively fear the unknown and the unpredictable. And so we spend our lives trying to weed out unpredictability. And in that, we get rid of diversity. It's just a byproduct of being that way. And governments do it, and individual people do it, and corporations do it. They want to have a manageable, with no surprises, let me do my thing and let me do it efficiently. But, that's not a great representation or metaphor for what life is. Life is a series of unpredictable events.
Totally.
So, and I love the idea about a lawn, because they brainwash people. It's been around since the 1600s, but in the 50s, they really went with advertising and told people, no, don't grow anything else. Grow the lawn. We'll sell you the chemicals to keep it green, and everybody will envy you. Yeah,
no, it's true. And I think that is, again, I think, if we tend to take a different look at things from a different perspective and maybe say, well, why do we think that a green lawn is beautiful? Why can it not have dandelions or clover or creeping thyme or something else in it? And look at what's in there. I love when I am able to go outside and in the spring and summer, and look down on a patch of lawn that we have here. And, there's a little area off our porch this year that I went and stood there and just sat there for a couple of minutes. And I looked and I counted over a dozen different types of insects right there that are on those flowers and crawling around. And I just love that, because again, it goes back to the diversity of what is in our environment. And all these creatures are, benefit us in some way. It's hard to think of like a mosquito as being a beneficial insect, and I'm not thinking they are, but they have a role somewhere. They do have a role in the ecosystem as food for some other animal. Yeah. And that's something that often with insects tends to get overlooked. There's an insect apocalypse that's going on. That we've lost 70% or so of flying insects over the last 50 years through decline. And it's not just pesticides, but it's also climate change and it's habitat loss and it's disease and parasites, and all these things are contributing. But I think that we need to try and protect that habitat and create that diversity, and not use those insecticides and herbicides and fungicides on our lawns and gardens. And nature has a way of sorting itself out, and I think we really need to foster that complexity and appreciate that complexity a little bit more.
And Mr. Nelson is doing a great job restraining himself. Me personally, I'm pissed about this. I see and it's not just the insects either. There's a full-on everything beautiful in nature that you could ever. Zoologists, biologists, they're all pulling their hair out right now. So,
it's a frustrating time. It's a challenging time. But I think, I also, as a person that I would never tell my neighbor what to do on their property. But our approach, my wife Sally and I, is that our approach is like the concept: if we keep our side of the street clean, so to speak, maybe other people will see that. They'll say, "Oh, you have a lot of insects. You have a lot of birds on your property." And why is that? Well, because we have habitat for them to live on. We have a lot of insects that the birds feed on. And if you lose insects, you're losing birds, because many birds eat insects. And so having those two are just intricately linked. And that diversity of the food chain, if you will, is really, really, really important. And so the appreciating and looking at that connectivity is sort of, endlessly fascinating to me.
I find it fascinating too. Underrated all the way. Just something that we should have been doing from before. I had Dr. Elaine on, and she said she's consulting with farmers, and they say, well, you're telling me something that this isn't how my daddy farmed. And she says, well, that's how your grandfather farmed. And so this information isn't even that lost. But the fact is, we've never actually known it for sure. And capitalism plays such a big part in the profit motive, exploiting these natural processes. And that also needs to get addressed if we're going to hopefully climate change. And I have to say that climate change as it is, this greenwashing thing is real, because buying recycled toilet paper with a green label and buying a bamboo toothbrush isn't going to save us. We need to rethink our systems.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And how food is transported is a big part of it. I think we saw that, when we had, major hikes in gas prices here in the US this year. And so the cost of food is intricately linked to that. And so it goes back to that idea of buying local, growing some yourself, and supporting those local economies, because if you're dependent on your food coming from 3,000 miles away, it can get really expensive really quickly, and if there's some sort of natural disaster or an economic disaster, it's a problem. So I think that, not only supporting these local communities and food cultures in our area is super important, because you meet interesting people. First of all, you get delicious food, which is amazing. But then you get the satisfaction of knowing where your food comes from. And as Dr. Ingram said, this isn't the idea of regenerative agriculture is not really. It's a new turn on old practices. If you think about what, as you said, our grandfathers, grandmothers, great grandfathers, grandmothers, they were doing a lot of the same stuff on a smaller scale. And so we're relearning that. It is codified now. It's scientifically proven that soil does need to be re-enriched and revigorated and re-enlivened and built on constantly. That's something that they knew. That's something that our foreparents knew. And so sometimes it just takes a little while to, and a little DDT to slap us in the face and a couple of generations to make it pretty.
A little lead paint and lead in the water. Yeah. Like, well, maybe we should back up off this chemical stuff for a bit and relearn. Well, we're going to hope that it does. And on top of that, I have to say that the values of human beings will change significantly when they have more of a connection to their purpose and the work that they do. Right now, people have jobs, and it's work, but it's not work that you can be proud of or find any purpose in. And when people used to grow their own vegetables, they were the blacksmith in town or the shoemaker, they inherently had purpose. And I think when people have purpose, you live in a more civilized society. And I think people are disconnected from that at this point. And of course, and I wanted to ask you, as the world is becoming increasingly unhinged, how do you find time to relax and enjoy yourself?
I go outside. That is my during all of COVID. That is my therapy, is to go outside. If I get too bummed listening to the news or reading the news, I'll go outside and I'll look at a bird, look at the bugs, and it melts away for me immediately. That is totally my therapy. I agree with you in that if people want to feel some sort of connection, the idea of growing something is such a basic instinct in us as people. And it's such a magical experience when you take a little tiny tomato seed or a little tiny lettuce seed and you put it in the ground, and a week later it starts to sprout up, and this incredible energy and beauty and function comes out of this little tiny seed. It blows me away every single time. And I've been gardening my whole life, and it's just like magic. And, if you can connect kids to that, to show them, where does a tomato come from? How did that lettuce start? What does a carrot seed look like? And how does that little tiny carrot seed turn into a beautiful, 8-inch purple carrot? I just think that's a connection to people that is both psychologically wonderful and invigorating, but also nutritionally invigorating. And it's a connection to the natural world in a very pragmatic way, practical way. And I think that's a connection that we really need more of. And if you go to a farmer's market and just talk to the people there, if there's a farmer's market, if you live in a city, or go to a park and talk to the people that are working in the park, planting things, or bird watchers, or, getting connection to nature is so important. I think that, so much of our time we're looking at screens and we're looking at, dials and, in our cars, and just getting out and connecting to that is for me, that's therapy. And I think that other people really would enjoy it.
I hope that people come around and realize the same thing. But it brings me to my question I asked, what's your policy on spiders in the shower? You find a spider in your shower. What do you do with him? And what's the humane thing to do? Or do you kill him, or do you relocate him, or do you just give him a shower too?
I think it depends on the spider and the time. I did relocate a spider outside yesterday. I'm not a big fan of spiders, but I am impressed with them. I did relocate one outside yesterday, but they have met the vacuum a few times here too. So,
my policy is, as long as I'm clothed, I'll relocate you. But if you come around when I'm not clothed, you better look out. I might be vengeful. Yeah. But everything has its purpose, and
it does.
And I hope that everybody starts to realize that. I want people to also go see your movie, go rent it, stream it, get it on DVD, and The Pollinators. It's incredible. It's heartbreaking at times, but it's beautiful, informative, everything you would hope for in a documentary. So check it out. And you're going to be working on some new projects here soon. We don't want to say too much, but it's going to be good.
But the other thing I would like to just impart on people is that this, I'm a solutions-based, hopeful person. And, the insect decline, bird decline, all those issues are something that we can all do something about, right? And honeybees, it's sort of what we have out here in our backyard, and they can fly 5-7 miles if they need to. They fly as far as they have to get food, but they can fly quite a distance. A lot of these other bees only have a very small range. Some of these tiny sweat bees may live in just a little couple 100 feet or a half mile area. And so if people want to do something, what they can do is plant a garden, plant a window box, plant even a planter on your fire escape if you have a fire escape, or get involved in a community garden. And those kind of things, even on a very small level, if you think of it as almost like a mosaic or a quilt of habitat. So an insect go from here to there to there to there. And these little jumping off points are really, really, really important for a lot of the native pollinators and native insects. And on top of that, it's beautiful, right? So put grow something even on your porch or step of your house or wherever you're living, so you can find a place to plant something. And that really makes a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's one of the things that I really loved about working on the pollinators was that it's a totally actionable subject. There's something that everybody can do. If you live in Germany and you can buy a dozen different types of honey in any supermarket that you go to there. And, so people wherever they live, they can go to a farmer's market or go to a market and buy honey from a local beekeeper. And that supports those local economies, connects you to things. And then if you want to get involved in policy, on agricultural policy, on pesticide policy, on all of that stuff, if you don't want to do any gardening, you can do that. You might have the skills for that. So there's something that everybody can do to make this better. And I love that idea that if, a lot of small connections and actions can add up to a global change. And in my heart, I believe that. And I think that it's really something that people can embrace.
And as a cynic, I'm glad that you're hopeful, because I need all the hope I can get. I get frustrated, and I get pretty sure that there is no hope. But apathy is not good for fighting. We have two options. We can fight, or we can be destroyed, and that's not quite an option. And I have to say that honey even helps me with allergies in the summertime. A big spoonful, it's like being inoculated against the pollen that's giving me the trouble. And you can't, and all the different parts of the bees you have, the royal jelly and all this stuff. What's this stuff? What's the other stuff? Propolis.
Propolis, yeah.
This also has incredible medicinal benefits that we're just now learning about. And so it's worth knowing about. So people get out there and learn about it.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I think for people to do is ask questions, right? And because honey is not honey. If you buy a major supermarket, big box brand of honey, there's fraudulent honey out there, believe it or not. Honey that is not entirely honey, that may come from, some Asia countries of China and Vietnam are a couple that are come to mind, but also South America, where it's not actually honey at all. It's a rice syrup that has some honey in it. So that's why it's really important to ask where honey's coming from and how far did it go? Is it really honey?
And just because it comes in a little plastic bear doesn't make it real honey.
You're exactly right. And to get raw honey means that it isn't pasteurized and it still has a lot of those medicinal qualities. It will still have elements of pollen in it. So asking those questions about where did this honey come from, or even better, buying it from a local beekeeper if you can find one. And every farmer's market I think that I've ever been to, and I go to a lot of them whenever I travel, there's almost always a beekeeper there selling honey. And not only is it, you get something unique and local to that area, you get something seasonal, because honey is not honey. It's different every year, at least on my small scale, depending on the weather and what's blooming and what the bees are foraging on. The honey that I collect every year, and I don't get a lot, with just a few hives, is different. And it's kind of like it really is a taste of that season and what happened this season.
So what are some of the great flavors? Like, obviously, a lot of people don't know that there are actually different flavors. And through the natural process of bees collecting pollen, and depending on what plants they get, you can get. So what are some different kinds of honey? Yeah, here in the U.S., there are a lot of different types. I'm a big fan of pure wildflower honey, because again, it depends on where you get it. The wildflower honey from New York State would be different from the wildflower honey from Utah, right, or Florida, because of different plants and different seasons. But some of the varietals, and there's no such thing as a honey that is entirely one thing, because you can't really tell bees where to go. But if you have a raspberry honey, for instance, they're going to be out in raspberry bushes getting, collecting nectar from those raspberries. So it'll be predominant and will have a little taste of raspberry with it. Or some of the other ones that I really love are tupelo, which is a kind of an endangered tree in southern United States. Sourwood is another one that I like very much. I don't like flavored hot honey so much, because I think there's such complexity in the natural wildflower honey. Clover honey is it's very sort of straight ahead. It's kind of like the whole milk kind of approach, but doesn't have a tremendous amount of flavor to me, but it's a nice, light, palatable honey. Buckwheat, on the other hand, is a very heavy, dark honey. Wow.
Even though it's a white flower, it's very dark. It's going down the road to molasses.
I never heard of that one.
Yeah, it's very popular with Eastern Europeans. Is buckwheat honey, and it's really like robust, strong taste. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that I have. Sage honey is excellent.
Oh wow!
Because whenever I go somewhere, I try to find a beekeeper or whatever and collect a little bit and bring it home, because it's really fun to have. It's a great thing to do with kids too. Is to have people over and they start talking about, because a lot of people think honey is honey, and you say, okay, great. Try this, and what do you taste in that? What do what is in this? Lavender honey is an amazing one. Orange blossom honey is fantastic. So wow. you have these different subtle flavors that are in there depending on what it is, and it's just you can have a tasting with 5-10 different honeys that'll be a complete spectrum of taste. And honey is good when it's fresh. It's best when it's fresh, but it never goes bad. right?
That's true.
It stays good forever as long as it's kept from air. It'll last, forever. Essentially.
I read in a book when I was a kid that when the BBC they raided the ancient Egyptian pyramids, that they found honey and they tasted it and it was still just fine.
Yeah.
Just fine.
Yeah, sealed up. So that's amazing. It's amazing food stuff that can do that, and it's produced, by these insects, and they produce more than they have. It's kind of an interesting little trivia thing, but here in the U.S., if you find an old bank, sometimes on the cornice of the bank, you'll see an old beehive skep on the cornice of the front of the building or the corner of the building, whatever. And it's a symbol, it's an icon of saving, right? And bees will gather more than they can eat at any one time. And so they store the excess honey, which us beekeepers, exploit from them. And so it's just kind of a little interesting icon. Subculture.
So there was a time when we did idolize the right things, and we looked up to these kind of in the right way. Well, hopefully we get back to that again.
Yeah.
And how can you talk briefly about the difference as a sweetener to other things? Because we have pretty strict food laws in comparison to the United States. They don't let stuff like high fructose corn syrup and stuff. Do you think that there's a possibility that honey could or replace some of these terrible, more dangerous sweeteners? I mean, what do you think that the safety of? Do you know anything about how it's absorbed in the body? Anything like that?
Not a whole lot. I know as a sort of amateur baker, I know that it's a different thing because it has more of a liquid quality to it than like using cane sugar or whatever. Right. I know we as Americans eat too much sugar. So whether it's, I don't know. I don't know much about that, about how it could be incorporated. I think that, high fructose corn syrup is in so much of the stuff, but I'm a person that doesn't drink soda, and I try to avoid that stuff as much as possible, but I have other poisons that
I've got my gin and tonic right here. This is how I'm going out. Yeah. No, but this sugar is not going to be another episode with another professional expert, and they're going to come on and tell me the difference between all of them, because I have my suspicions. And generally, I would take something that's anciently older rather than something that was devised in a lab from taking apart corn proteins or whatever they're doing. But I've heard bad things. And also my wife is German. And as soon as she likes sweets, she's German chocolate, German cookies, stuff like that. She went to America and immediately had sugar shock constantly. She was kind of coming around in a diabetic coma. So there's something to be said about sweeteners in America. But that'll be another episode.
We need less of them.
That's what I think. If we see that there was an obesity epidemic, but we're not really looking at the root cause. Right. I should call this we're shooting ourselves in the foot podcast, because that's basically all we ever talk about.
Well, I think that, one of the things I will speculate on is with honey as compared to other things is that it is as a natural ingredient, as a totally natural ingredient. It is easier for our body to metabolize and absorb it, right? Something that is created like a high fructose corn syrup is a product of a laboratory. Right. And so it's a processed food, and how our bodies are able to process that, what it does to our sugar levels and how it reacts in our digestive system. It's not a natural way. And so the honey is, one of the original natural sweeteners. And I should just mention I did warn you about talking to a beekeeper, so you don't shut up. By the way, I'd like to remind you that an interesting thing is that honeybees are not native to North America, right? So they were brought here with the early colonials. The European settlers came over. When they came over, they brought honeybees with them, and because they brought seeds with them, and there's certain things that they knew that they needed to be pollinated, but also they needed sweetener. and they needed wax. And wax is another product of beehives that's very useful. So way back when in the 17th century and 16th century, they needed wax for sealing. They needed wax for waterproofing. They needed wax for a whole bunch of different things, as well as the sweeteners. And so when honeybees came here, they swarm, which is the natural way that they divide a hive. When they get too big, they'll raise a new queen, and then half the hive will leave, and that's a swarm. And so they went basically wild almost immediately. And so they lived very well in North America and spread west with people. And one of the first things that, Tom Seeley is an author, entomologist, a really, really smart guy from Cornell, who wrote a bunch of books about bees. And so, he showed me these different maps and things of illustrations of people when they would go explore into new territory. They would look for a bee tree because that's where bees lived, and they would try and they would find the bees, and then they would get the honey for their sweetener, and they would take some wax for that, and then the bees would naturally, and so they went feral and became ubiquitous on the landscape, although they are not a native species here.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, good for them. I'm glad that they could go anywhere and make that their home. That's my style.
Yeah. And then we organized them into, tried to organize them into hives,
Yeah.
So.
And it's a long process. But then at some point you have actually a pretty wild diversity of bees now. We have bumblebees and honeybees that exist seemingly in the wild.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yep. And some people say they're competitive. That the amount of honeybees that are on the landscape is hurting the native bees. I don't know if I subscribe to that. I think in some places, sure, they can be oversaturated. But like, the beekeepers and the pollinators, when they move them into orchards or fields, they're doing it for the reason that they don't have bees, because it is a monoculture. And so they don't have the native bees in a number that can do the work. And so, I think that they coexist, with the native bees, fairly well, in my opinion. I know some people have strong feelings about that. But the reality is they're here. And, so I think trying to, create a habitat where all of these bees can survive is, our goal. It should be our goal to plant things that are attractive to native bees. Like we have something growing out here in our yard called mountain mint, which is a really interesting, it's in the mint family, but it's not like a spearmint or a peppermint. But it's a beautiful flower, and it has, it's amazing. Somebody gave me a cutting of it a few years ago, and I go out there and I'll count a dozen different types of bees and wasps and things on this one type of flower. It's just amazing that it attracts so many things. And it's like, if we create a habitat for it, the insects will come back, the birds will come back, the diversity will come back. And so I think that should be a goal in our home spaces, but also in our public spaces, schools and parks. I think there's room for that, and try to create more wild areas that is attractive. So.
And I told Dr. Elaine, I said, in order for us to get where we need to go with this whole thing, we need to I went to Mexico, and I realized that people were still able to grow their own food and be able to sell it in the local places, in the mercados and stuff. We need to reintroduce agriculture as a cultural value, that each and every person in every household does something to supplement their food and everything, and get off this industrialized agriculture thing, because it's a big no-no. It's killing us.
Yeah, it's true. And it's also, I totally agree with you, but it's also enriching, we grow, we have a pretty big garden here that we grow both flowers as well as vegetables. And we don't eat solely from that. It's not that big, but we belong to a community supported agriculture program that's 2 miles away from us here. And so for anybody who doesn't know how that works, it's a farmer that's basically growing on a subscription basis, that you're paying the farmer in advance, and then they're growing a season of food. And our particular one has a summer CSA and a winter CSA. And it's literally a mile and a half from our house. We're lucky enough that we have an intrepid young farmer who's down there, growing amazing food that we get every week. And we go down there. We've ridden our bike down there. Sometimes we'll drive and pick it up on the way. But it's amazing. And it's also an opportunity to make those connections with the farmer, with the people growing the food, with the other customers that are there too. And it's a community that before he had it, was not there. And he's created this little community that we value so much. We always see people that we know there, beyond the farmers, but other neighbors. Oh, I didn't know you were part of this. Yeah, I'm part of this too. And there's that connection of all over food and how it's grown in our area. And its carbon footprint from a climate change standpoint is really small. It's not traveling very far at all. And it's grown locally. But we're lucky enough that we live in a place where we can do that. But you can also grow a lot in your backyard or in your window box.
And for all you people that maybe aren't into the whole sustain, I think a lot of the times these CSA people will deliver it to you.
It's different all over the place. Yeah. So there's we went to a farm earlier in the year. We went on a farm tour in upstate New York along the Vermont border, and talking to the farmer up there, they did in that farm up in Essex, New York, they delivered food down into the Catskill area, not far from where we are, and then all the way down to Brooklyn. Wow. And they did that once a week, and they had a route that they would go on. And so they have people from Brooklyn that are subscribing to a CSA that's up in, Essex, New York, 175 miles away or so. It's amazing. And they're getting this fresh food.
Yeah, it's hard to get fresh vegetables in Brooklyn. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. They're great markets though. They're really good markets in New York. There's some of the amazing ones. And I'm a big fan of farmers markets. I try to go to them whenever I go somewhere. I've been to farmers markets in Germany and all through Europe, and as well as anytime I travel, I try to find the local farmers market because it's a really interesting way to plug into that local community, that local, what's growing, what's seasonal, whether you're in Washington State or Tallahassee or, San Diego, what's growing there? What are people eating right now?
So I gotta ask you, what did you went through Europe, you went through Germany. What did you think about Germany? How was it? Where'd you go?
Oh, I loved it. I've been there a couple of times over the years. Sally and I worked on a film on the anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, and so we went right from the Baltic to the Adriatic. That was a film for BBC, and so we're along Germany a lot of that, and then I did a couple of different films there. I loved it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's a really fascinating place.
And like you said, for a bee guy, you could see how bees are a cultural thing where people will just, if they have a small backyard, they might get a few racks of bees.
Yeah, totally.
It's really cool. But yeah, what I applaud the Germans for is eating, like you just said, eating locally at that time of the year regionally. So they do stuff. They have weeds that grow in the forest. They grind them up and put them into gummy bears. That has this specific flavor. And pickling, curing. Yeah. And they don't have big refrigerators, so they put stuff in the cellar and stuff. And they haven't got to that point of capitalism where they got it like the 1950s American atomic family. They didn't go through all that factory made crap. They still have some pretty strong traditions in making their own beer, making sure that the ingredients in beer are pure. So I have to applaud them there. They are very rational and logical people.
Yeah. But I think it's really important. It's to connect to that food culture. I mean, when and I know people here where we live that go shop at Walmart or whatever, and it just kind of breaks my heart because I think that, there's, first of all, that money is not staying in the economy here locally. It's just going to some of the richest people in the world. And it's also, it's a very impersonal thing. And I recognize that economics are a factor for some people, and that finding something that is perceived as the cheapest is not just it's a necessity. I recognize that. But I also know that, like our CSA that we go to, he has a sliding scale. And if people are really in need, they work with them. And so there are a lot of options, and food pantries that do the same. We have a food exchange program here in our little town where people can bring, some of the farmers here bring their excess produce and they'll leave it out. So anybody can take it. And it happens on a Saturday. And if I, as a gardener, grow, too much zucchini, I can bring it down there and just leave it, and somebody will take it. Awesome. And I love that kind of exchange. But the food connection for me is so important, because it's not only is it nutrition and delicious and health, but it's also community and culture, right? And economics. And so by, supporting those local economies, you're supporting your local community, you're building your community, you're providing jobs for people as agricultural workers or farmers that are learning, that may have their own farm down the road. And these small farms, I think, is part of the answer to food security going forward, that, you can grow quite a bit of food on a couple of acres of land. And, we're lucky enough to live where we live here in the Hudson Valley in New York. There are a lot of legacy farms were big farms that are now home to smaller farmers that are taking a portion of it on a lease basis or whatever, or bought a piece. And they're able to start a small operation, and not everybody makes it, of course. That's economics and capitalism, but they're people that are supporting their families, and as well as feeding the community. And that, I think, is, something that we can really strive a long way to, and not try and, go to the big box stores to buy our food. As we have to get some things from supermarkets, and I go to supermarket.
Sure, me too.
I think for a lot of our food, but
But I think it's safe to say that if you continue to buy the cheapest product, that's going to set you on a treadmill to continue to get a cheaper product next time and a cheaper product this time. It just kind of, you're never going to get a better product, and unless you go out to these CSA kind of places or you need, for a lot of people out there, you just need to go out there and taste the difference. But I'm assuming a lot of people that would watch my show would already know this. But if you don't, go out and try the difference between an heirloom tomato and something that was conventionally farmed, and you tell me.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah. So, well, we're going to have you back again, because this was too much fun and too easy. All the prepared questions got thrown away. I said, you know what, this guy's cool. We're just going to chat. So
I'm passionate about what I do, and passionate about bees and nature and food, and so I'm happy to talk about it. And it's great to meet you, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, and also everybody watch the Pollinators and check out what he's up to and what he might be coming up with next, because he's an excellent filmmaker and an excellent human being.
Well, thank you. You're too kind.
Thanks. All right. We'll wave goodbye to everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.